"If you're going to kill me, do it now," she whispered. But the mercy in her eyes made him lower his gun. It was late at night when everything changed. The street was almost empty, quiet in a way that made even small sounds feel loud. The air was cool, and the streetlights flickered as if they were tired of staying awake. She was walking faster than usual, her bag held close to her body. She wanted to reach home quickly. It had been a long day, and all she wanted was rest. She did not notice him at first. He stood near the corner, half hidden in the shadows. His heart was beating fast, louder than the city itself. His hands were shaking, not from the cold but from the storm inside him. He had been walking for hours, going nowhere, thinking too much. Every step felt heavy, as if his past was pulling him backward. He had reached a point where he felt trapped, cornered by life itself. When she passed by, their eyes met for just a second. That second was enough. He stepped forward quickly, blocking her path. Before she could react, he raised the gun. It was old, worn, but real. The metal looked cold under the streetlight. Her breath caught in her throat. Time slowed down. The world became small, reduced to the space between them. "Don't move," he said. His voice was rough, unsure, not as strong as he wanted it to sound. Her body froze, but her mind raced. Fear rushed through her, sharp and sudden. She felt it in her chest, her hands, her legs. Every part of her wanted to run, to scream, to do something, but nothing came out. The street was silent again, except for her breathing. She slowly raised her hands, not high, just enough to show she was not a threat. Her eyes stayed on his face. He looked younger than she expected, tired. His eyes were dark, filled with something heavy, anger mixed with pain. "What do you want?" she asked softly. He did not answer. The gun trembled slightly in his grip. He had not planned to meet her. He had not planned this moment. But now that he was here, he felt like he had no way back. "Please," she said, her voice calm but weak. "I don't have much." Still, he said nothing. His jaw tightened. His finger rested near the trigger. In his mind, thoughts collided. He told himself to stay strong, to finish what he started. But the closer he looked at her, the harder it became. She was not shouting. She was not begging loudly. She looked scared, yes, but there was something else in her eyes, something quiet, something human. A few seconds passed, then a few more. Finally, she spoke again, barely above a whisper. "If you're going to kill me, do it now." The words hung in the air between them. He felt as if someone had struck him. His breath stopped for a moment. He had expected screams, tears, panic, not this, not acceptance, not honesty. She did not say it with anger. She did not say it to challenge him. She said it because she was tired, tired of fear, tired of fighting moments she could not control. If this was the end, she wanted it over quickly. Her eyes met his fully now. They were wet but steady. There was fear in them, yes, but also something else. Mercy. Not for herself, but for him. He saw it clearly, and it broke something inside him. His hand tightened around the gun, then loosened. His arm felt heavy, as if it no longer belonged to him. His mind filled with confusion. Why was she looking at him like that? Why wasn't she hating him? "Why would you say that?" he asked, his voice quieter now. She swallowed. "Because I don't want to beg," she said, "and because I can see you don't really want to do this." The words struck deeper than he expected. He wanted to deny them. He wanted to shout that she was wrong, but his voice would not rise. His eyes burned. "You don't know me," he said. "No," she replied gently, "but I know pain when I see it." Something shifted. The streetlight flickered again, and for a moment everything felt unreal, like a dream he could wake up from if he tried hard enough. He remembered other nights, other choices, times when anger made decisions for him, times when he did things he could not take back. He had told himself he was beyond saving, that nothing mattered anymore. But standing there looking at her, he felt that belief crack. His arm began to lower slowly, almost without his permission. The gun pointed toward the ground now. His shoulders sagged, as if a heavy weight had been lifted, even though nothing was resolved. She noticed the movement and took a careful breath. She did not move closer. She did not run. She stayed where she was, giving him space, giving him dignity. "I don't want to hurt you," he said suddenly. The words surprised him as much as they surprised her. "I know," she said. Silence followed. Not the sharp, threatening silence from before, but a softer one. A pause, a break in the storm. Cars passed far away. Somewhere a dog barked. Life continued, unaware of how close it had come to stopping for one of them. He took a step back, then another. His eyes never left her face. He looked ashamed now, exposed. The anger that had filled him earlier drained away, leaving only exhaustion. "I'm sorry," he muttered. He did not know if that was enough. He knew it was not, but it was all he had. She nodded slowly. She did not say everything was okay. She did not say she forgave him. She simply acknowledged the moment for what it was. "Please," she said, "put it away." He hesitated, then slipped the gun into his jacket. His hands were shaking more now than before. Without the weapon between them, he felt smaller, more human. "I won't call anyone," she said quietly. "Just go." He looked at her one last time. He wanted to say something meaningful, something that explained everything. But there were no words big enough. So he turned and walked away, his steps uneven, his mind heavy. She stayed where she was until he disappeared into the darkness. Only then did her legs give in slightly. She leaned against a wall, breathing deeply, trying to calm her body. Her hands trembled now. The fear she had held back rushed in all at once. She was alive. As she continued her walk home, the street looked the same, but she felt different. The night air felt colder, louder. Every sound made her flinch, but beneath the fear there was something else too, a strange sadness and a strange hope. She knew that moment would stay with her forever, and somewhere down the road, walking alone under the same dark sky, he knew it too. The night after the incident, he could not sleep. Every shadow in his small apartment seemed to move, whispering reminders of what he had almost done. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the floor. The gun was still hidden in his jacket pocket, though now it felt heavy, almost like it carried more than just metal. It carried the weight of everything he had done in his life, every choice that led him here, every mistake he thought he could bury. He remembered his childhood, though he tried not to. It was filled with noise and shouting, empty promises and moments when love seemed just out of reach. His parents had their own struggles, and they tried, but life had been too hard for them to guide him properly. He had learned to take care of himself early, to fight for every little thing, to hide pain behind a mask of toughness. Over time, that mask became his face. People saw him as someone hard, someone dangerous, someone untouchable. And maybe that was easier than showing what he really felt inside. School had not been easier. Teachers tried to reach him, but their words bounced off a wall he had built long ago. Friends came and went. Some tried to understand him, some tried to challenge him. Most gave up eventually. By the time he was a teenager, he had learned that trust was expensive and that mistakes could cost him more than just reputation. They could cost him his life. By the time he grew older, anger had become a constant companion. Anger at the world, anger at himself, anger at every time he had failed to be better. It was a fire that never went out. And that night on the street, standing over her, that fire had pushed him toward a choice he had convinced himself he needed to make. Yet in her eyes he had seen something he had not expected: mercy, calmness, understanding. It was not just that she had survived, it was that she had seen him as a human being, not just a danger, not just a criminal, not just a problem. And for the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar, a crack in the anger that had controlled him for so long. He thought about the days before, the nights when he had roamed streets like this one, feeling invisible, feeling unwanted. He remembered the small jobs he had taken, barely enough to eat. He remembered nights sleeping on cold floors, waiting for a future that never seemed to arrive. He remembered fights he had gotten into, people he had hurt, and doors that had closed because of him. Every one of these memories seemed to press down on him now. The gun in his jacket was no longer just a weapon, it was a symbol of choices made too quickly, of years of ignoring help, of a life he had been told was unfixable. And yet somehow she had given him a different choice in a single moment. He remembered the exact way she had whispered it, the words that had made him stop. "If you're going to kill me, do it now." Not a shout, not a plea, not even a demand, just acceptance. And in that acceptance, there had been courage. And in that courage, there had been understanding of his pain, of his struggles, and maybe even a tiny hope that he could still change. Sitting on his bed, he tried to remember the last time someone had looked at him without fear. Not someone who wanted to fight him, not someone who wanted something from him, but someone who looked at him and saw him for what he was. It had been so long that he could not remember. And now that memory, or perhaps that moment, was lodged deep inside him, refusing to be ignored. He thought of her daily. At first it was just the memory of the night, the streetlights, her calm voice, the way her eyes had met his. But soon it became more than that. He thought about her courage, the quiet way she had faced him, the way she had not let fear control her. It haunted him in the best and worst ways. He did not know her, and yet, somehow, she had touched a part of him he had thought lost forever. He began to examine himself. Not because he wanted to, but because he could not help it. Why had he almost done what he had done? Why had he chosen the gun over talking, over walking away, over life itself? What had led him to a point where ending someone else's life felt like the only option? And most importantly, what did it mean that he had stopped? The answers were not easy. There was no single moment, no single choice that had led him here. It was a lifetime of small failures, of pain, of misunderstanding, of missed opportunities, all stacking up until he felt trapped. And that night, standing on the street, he realized just how much he had carried alone. In the following days, he started noticing other things. How quickly anger could rise, how easily words could hurt, how fragile trust really was. He thought about people he had pushed away, and he began to see the faces he had ignored, the friends he had lost, the family who had tried to help him when he refused. For the first time in a long time, he considered that maybe he had been wrong about a lot of things, about himself, about others, about life. He began small. He put the gun away in a safer place, thinking carefully before touching it. He tried to speak more calmly with people, to listen instead of reacting immediately. He even started going for walks in the same area where it had happened, trying to make sense of the streets that had felt so dark before. Every step felt heavy, but also freeing, like he was learning to carry his weight differently. At the same time, he could not escape the memory of her eyes. He did not know her name, and he might never know it, but that image stayed with him, guiding him in ways he could not explain. He imagined what she might have gone through that night, how it felt to stand there calmly while someone pointed a gun at her. He realized that her courage was not something she showed because she was fearless, but because she chose to see him as more than his mistakes. That realization shook him more than anything else. He also began noticing small moments of mercy around him. A neighbor who smiled despite being tired, a bus driver who helped an elderly passenger, a stranger holding the door. Each act reminded him that the world was not just a place of anger and fear. And if those small acts of kindness could exist, maybe he could find a place for himself that was not defined by violence. But it was not easy. Some nights, the memory of the gun, the street, and the choices he had almost made returned like a storm. Anger rose again, frustration burned, and he felt the temptation to fall back into old habits. He had to fight harder than ever to choose a different path, to choose life, to choose change. And every time he remembered her eyes, the quiet mercy, and it helped him pause. It helped him remember that even broken people could stop a moment of destruction. He thought about what it meant to truly live, to not just survive. For years, survival had been enough. But now he understood that survival alone was not a life worth living. A life worth living included responsibility, thought, and sometimes mercy. And if he could learn to carry mercy, maybe he could heal some of the wounds he had carried for decades. He began keeping a small notebook, writing down thoughts, memories, and lessons. It was not a journal in the traditional sense. It was more like a conversation with himself, a way to examine who he was, who he wanted to be, and how he could make the difficult choice every day to be different. Each word he wrote reminded him of the moment that had started it all, the street, the gun, and the woman who had stopped him with a single whisper. Weeks passed. Slowly, he began interacting with others more calmly. He volunteered for small community jobs, offering help where he could. He still struggled, of course. Old habits were hard to break, and anger did not disappear overnight. But every time he felt it rising, he remembered her eyes. That memory became a guide, a constant reminder that his choices mattered, that he could stop a cycle of violence before it began. He also began thinking more deeply about forgiveness. Not forgiveness from others, but forgiveness of himself. He had hurt people, made bad choices, and carried pain. But he realized that continuing to punish himself would only keep the anger alive. True change required accepting his past, learning from it, and moving forward without letting it control him. And somewhere in all of this, a quiet hope grew. Not a loud, sudden hope, but a small, steady one. A belief that perhaps life could be different, that people could be better, that mistakes did not have to define the rest of their days. That night on the street had shown him that one small action, one choice could change everything. Her eyes had done that. Her mercy had done that. And he understood that he had the power to continue it, not just for himself, but for others. By the end of the month, he noticed something he had not expected. Peace. Not complete peace, not the kind that erased his past, but a quiet understanding that he could live differently. The anger was still there sometimes, the memories still came back, but he no longer let them decide his actions. He had learned that the weight of the past could be carried differently, with care, thought, and sometimes mercy. And every time he thought about her, about that night, he felt both gratitude and responsibility. Gratitude for the way she had stopped him, and responsibility to live in a way that honored that moment. The gun was no longer a symbol of fear, it had become a symbol of choice. A choice he could make every day. Life continued, slowly but surely. And though the world outside his apartment was still full of challenges, he no longer felt entirely trapped. The streets were still dark at night, but now he walked them with awareness, remembering the woman who had looked at him not with fear, but with mercy. It had been a moment that could have ended in tragedy. Instead, it became the start of something different, a journey of understanding, responsibility, and hope. And he knew, deep inside, that the rest of his life depended on remembering it. She could not forget that night either. Even though she had walked home safely, the memory of the street, the dark corners, and the man with the gun stayed with her. At first, she tried to push it away. She told herself it was just an isolated incident, a dangerous stranger she would never see again. But the memory clung to her, waking her at odd hours, making her heart race even in the quiet of her own room. She kept replaying the moment in her mind. The way he had stood there, gun raised, hand trembling, face tense with anger and fear. She remembered the flicker of hesitation in his eyes. She remembered the words she whispered, almost without thinking. "If you're going to kill me, do it now." She had meant them simply as a way to stop panicking, a way to confront fear with truth. She had not realized how deeply those words would reach him, how they would affect the course of his life, or even hers. In the days following, she noticed a subtle change in herself too. Before that night, she had often felt small and powerless in a world that could be cruel and unfair. Life had not been easy for her either. She had responsibilities she did not always want, challenges that seemed impossible at times, and moments when fear tried to overwhelm her. But standing there on the street, looking directly into the eyes of someone ready to hurt her, she had felt something strange, a clarity she had not expected. She realized courage did not always roar. Sometimes it was quiet. Sometimes it was simply the ability to face danger without letting it control your actions. She had not fought him, had not screamed or begged, because deep down she knew that fear alone could not stop anger. Only understanding, only a reflection of humanity could do that. And somehow her calmness had reached him. For days afterward she could not stop thinking about what might have happened. She imagined all the ways it could have ended differently. What if she had screamed? What if she had run? What if she had reacted with anger or panic? Each scenario made her shiver. Each scenario made her thankful for the choice she had made in that terrifying moment. The choice to stay calm. The choice to see him as a human being rather than just a threat. At the same time, she felt a deep empathy for him. She did not know his story, yet she could sense the weight he carried. There had been pain in his eyes, exhaustion in his stance, and confusion in his voice. She realized that he was not evil, only deeply troubled. He had made a dangerous choice, yes, but he had also paused. He had looked at her and seen mercy, even though he had expected only fear and anger. That pause told her more about him than his words ever could. She began to think about her own life differently. She saw how anger and fear could make people do things they would later regret. She saw how fragile humanity could be, how easily a single moment could tip the balance between life and death. And she realized that the way she responded in small moments mattered. That quiet strength, the kind she had used on the street, could ripple outwards in ways she might never see. Work and daily life went on, but she noticed small changes in herself. She spoke to people more gently, listened more carefully, and tried to understand rather than judge quickly. She discovered that people, like the man on the street, often carried unseen burdens. She started noticing the quiet struggles of strangers and friends alike, the subtle ways fear and pain influenced behavior. She did not always act perfectly, but she began to see the world with new awareness. Her friends noticed a subtle difference in her too. She seemed calmer, more thoughtful, more patient. She did not boast about it, did not speak of courage as if it were something she owned. She simply carried herself with a quiet strength, the kind that comes from having stared fear in the face and chosen understanding over panic. Even her family noticed it. They had always admired her resilience, but now there was something more. She carried a wisdom in her expressions, a softness in her approach, and an ability to face conflict without immediately reacting. Her parents, siblings, and friends could not name it, but they felt it. They felt that she had grown, not in loud or obvious ways, but in the most human, essential ways. She also reflected on mercy itself, how rare it was, how powerful it could be. That night she had given mercy without thinking about it, and it had changed everything. She realized that mercy was not weakness, as some might believe. Mercy required courage and awareness. It required seeing another human being, even in moments when fear screamed to act selfishly. And in that realization she discovered a new part of herself. At the same time, she struggled with fear. Memories of the gun, the street, and the tension returned at unexpected times. Sometimes she would close her eyes and see him standing there, face tense, hands shaking, pointing the gun at her. Her heart would race. She would take deep breaths, trying to remind herself that it was over, that she had survived. But the fear lingered. It was not shameful or unusual. It was a reminder of how close life can come to danger and how fragile safety really is. Over time, she began sharing parts of the story with close friends, though carefully. She did not want to frighten anyone, and she did not seek attention. She shared it as a lesson, a moment that revealed something essential about human nature. People listened, amazed at her calmness and clarity. Some asked how she had done it. She explained simply. She had focused not on fear but on humanity. On seeing the person in front of her as someone struggling, not as just a threat. In her reflection, she also imagined what might have happened to him after that night. She did not wish to know him personally, nor did she want to imagine a friendship. She only wondered what went through his mind, how he would carry that moment forward. She hoped he had found some understanding, some pause from anger and fear. She hoped he had begun to see himself differently, and perhaps even begun to make choices that led to a better life. At home, she began keeping a small notebook herself, not as a journal of feelings, but as a place to write lessons and observations. She noted moments when people reacted with anger or fear, and when they responded with kindness or understanding. She discovered patterns, small truths about how human beings operate under pressure, and how compassion could sometimes change a life in an instant. She also began to take care of herself in ways she had not before. Sleep, nutrition, exercise, simple things, but they mattered more now. She realized that courage and empathy were easier to maintain when one was not constantly drained. She began to see that her own strength and clarity were connected to how she treated herself and how she managed her own stress and fear. Her relationships deepened as a result. Friends and family noticed she listened better, reacted less harshly, and offered help in ways that felt thoughtful. She did not force change on others, nor did she preach. Instead, she demonstrated it quietly, through action and presence. People responded naturally, drawn to the calm and understanding she carried. She also discovered a love for small acts of courage. Not the dramatic, dangerous kind, but the quiet ones. Speaking truth gently, helping someone in need, intervening in small conflicts without escalating them. Each act reinforced what she had learned on the street, that courage and mercy were powerful forces, sometimes stronger than fear, anger, or violence. Despite the growth, the memory of that night remained vivid. She did not pretend it was gone. Sometimes the fear would return, sudden and sharp. But instead of panicking, she learned to breathe, to remember her own strength, and to reflect on the man who had been ready to hurt her, and yet had stopped. That pause, that hesitation, was a lesson she carried every day. Months passed. She could walk past the same street without panic, though her awareness remained high. She had learned that courage did not mean ignoring danger. It meant acknowledging it, understanding it, and responding in a way that honored life rather than fear. She discovered that strength and empathy were not opposites, they were partners. And somewhere in the quiet moments of reflection, she realized something important. One single moment could change more than one life. That night, her calmness had reached him. It had likely shifted his path in ways she might never see. And that knowledge, though heavy with responsibility, brought her a quiet peace. She had acted without ego, without desire for reward, and yet the ripple of her action extended beyond her imagination. The experience also made her more patient with herself. She had learned that fear and courage could coexist, that mistakes could happen, and that growth was a continuous process. Every day was an opportunity to act with understanding, to see others as humans, and to carry the lesson of mercy into ordinary moments. In the evenings, she sometimes stared out the window, thinking about the night. The dark street, the flickering lights, the heavy silence, it was all vivid in her mind. And yet, she no longer saw it as just a frightening moment. She saw it as a turning point. A moment that taught her the depth of human complexity, the power of mercy, and the potential for change, even in the darkest moments. She began to carry that lesson quietly into every part of her life. Work, family, friends, even strangers, all became opportunities to exercise understanding, patience, and compassion. She discovered that human connection was fragile, yes, but also powerful. That even small acts of kindness or calm could change outcomes, just as one whisper had changed a life on that dark street. And though she did not know his name and would likely never see him again, she felt a connection to him in a strange, indirect way. She had reached him when it mattered most, and that truth stayed with her as both a reminder and a guide. It was a lesson she would carry forever. That courage does not always roar, that mercy can be stronger than anger, and that one small choice, made in a quiet, ordinary moment, can ripple out in ways no one could predict. And in that knowledge, she found a strength that was subtle but unshakable, a strength that would shape the rest of her life. The night that had changed everything replayed endlessly in his mind. He could still feel the weight of the gun in his hand, the cold metal pressing against his palm, the sharp tension in his shoulders. Every detail of her eyes, calm and steady, haunted him. For weeks afterward, he could not sleep properly. The memory of that quiet mercy followed him everywhere, making him question everything about himself. He knew that he had been lucky to pause, lucky that she had not panicked, lucky that her calmness had reached him. But he also knew that luck had nothing to do with it. What she had done, standing there without fear, had forced him to confront his own choices. The truth hit him hard. If he had acted differently, if he had let anger take control, it would have been the last mistake of someone's life, and possibly the last chance at his own redemption. He began thinking about every wrong path he had taken, how easily anger had guided him, how often he had chosen frustration and fear over understanding. He remembered fights he had started, harsh words he had said, people he had pushed away. For years, he had believed there was no going back, that life had set a course he could not change. But that night, a single pause had shown him that choices still mattered. It was not a dramatic hero moment. He did not feel triumphant. He felt terrified, ashamed, and uncertain. Walking away from her had been harder than pointing the gun. He had carried a lifetime of anger, and letting it go, even for a single instant, felt like letting go of a part of himself he had always relied on. Every step away from her felt heavier than any step he had taken before. He began to understand the true meaning of responsibility. Not responsibility to others at first, but to himself. Every action he took, every decision he made had consequences. Carrying the gun that night had been a physical act, but lowering it had been moral, mental, and emotional. That simple movement, almost instinctive, was more important than any words could describe. He started noticing patterns in his own behavior that he had never recognized before. How anger built quietly, unnoticed, until it exploded. How fear disguised itself as justification. How hopelessness sometimes felt like the only truth. But standing on the street looking at her, he had realized that even in the darkest moments, the human heart could change course. He did not celebrate the moment, but he did examine it carefully. Why had he hesitated? Why had her eyes, her whisper, her courage stopped him? He thought about the fragility of human life, the randomness of circumstance, and the rare chance that someone could reach him through understanding rather than fear. And he realized painfully that he had never truly been reached before. The following days were filled with reflection. He started small, trying to make better choices in ordinary situations. If someone cut him off in traffic, he would breathe instead of yell. If someone argued with him at work, he would listen instead of reacting. Every small choice became a practice, a reminder of the night when one pause had changed everything. At home, he looked at the gun he had hidden in the closet. It no longer held the same power over him. It had been a tool of fear and destruction, but now it was a symbol of choice. He decided to lock it away permanently, to never use it again. The act was simple, but it carried the weight of every mistake, every moment of anger, and every life that could have ended because of him. He also began thinking about accountability. For years, he had blamed circumstances, other people, the world itself. That night he realized that blaming others could not undo actions. He had to face himself fully, understand his motives, and commit to a different path. The mercy he had received demanded that he act differently, not because it was easy, but because it was right. Everyday life became a challenge and a lesson. Old habits were hard to break. There were moments when frustration and anger tried to return, But every time he remembered her eyes. He imagined the quiet calm, the trust she had shown him by not reacting with hatred or panic. Those memories became a guide, a gentle push toward better decisions, toward understanding, toward change. He began seeking small ways to give back, not in grand gestures but simple acts of kindness. Helping neighbors with groceries, volunteering at a local shelter, listening to friends and coworkers with patience. Each act was a reminder that life was fragile, that people could hurt easily, and that even small actions could carry enormous weight. He also reflected deeply on empathy. He realized that people acted out of pain more often than cruelty, that anger and violence were often cries for help, not just acts of harm. Seeing her that night had forced him to understand this truth, not just intellectually but in his bones. He had glimpsed the human heart in a way he never had before, and it changed him. The most difficult part was facing himself. Looking in the mirror, he saw the man who had almost ended someone's life. He saw the choices he had made, the mistakes, the failures. And yet, he also saw a man who had paused, who had recognized the humanity of another person, and who had begun to take responsibility. That duality was painful but necessary. He understood that true change required more than reflection. It required action. Each day, he had to choose differently. Each decision became a test. Would he react with old habits, or would he pause, reflect, and act with care? Sometimes he failed. Sometimes he slipped into anger or frustration. But every failure reminded him why the moment on the street had mattered so much. Over time, he began to notice small signs of transformation in himself. He slept more peacefully, though the memory of that night still lingered. He started taking walks in the same neighborhood where it happened, not out of fear, but out of reflection. Seeing the streetlights, the corners, the empty spaces reminded him of both danger and possibility. The memory became a teacher rather than a source of anxiety. He also began thinking about forgiveness, not just forgiving others but forgiving himself. He had carried guilt for years, believing he was beyond repair. That night had taught him otherwise. Forgiveness was not an easy gift. It was a commitment to change, a promise to act differently. He began practicing this quietly, forgiving himself for past mistakes while holding himself accountable for the future. Relationships became more meaningful. Friends and family noticed that he listened more carefully, spoke more thoughtfully, and reacted less harshly. He began repairing bonds he had neglected for years. He could not undo the past, but he could act differently in the present. That alone felt like progress, though it was slow and sometimes painful. He also began noticing the lives of strangers more. Seeing someone angry or frustrated, he paused before judging. Seeing someone sad or alone, he offered small gestures of kindness. The memory of her calmness reminded him that small actions could prevent tragedy, could change the path of a life, could ripple far beyond what he could see. Months passed, and slowly a sense of peace began to take root. It was not perfect. Fear and frustration returned at times. Old habits called to him, but each time he remembered that night. He remembered her eyes, her whisper, the courage she had shown him. That memory became a moral compass, a quiet guide toward a life lived differently. The most profound realization was this: mercy had power. One single act, one quiet moment of understanding, had stopped him from making the worst mistake of his life. It had opened a door he thought was permanently closed. And now he had to walk through it, not for recognition, not for praise, but because it was the right thing to do. He began seeing the world with a new lens. He noticed pain behind anger, struggle behind frustration, fear behind cruelty. He discovered that understanding another person did not excuse mistakes, but it allowed for growth. And he wanted to grow. He wanted to live differently, to act differently, to carry the lessons he had learned into every choice he made. Every morning became a test. How would he treat people today? How would he react to stress? How would he act in moments of fear or anger? The answers were not easy, but the process itself became a source of strength. He learned to pause, to breathe, to remember the mercy he had received, and to respond with care rather than impulse. He also realized the responsibility he carried toward others. Life was fragile, and decisions mattered. His actions could hurt or heal, harm or protect. The gun that night had reminded him of this truth in the starkest way possible. Each day forward, he tried to honor that lesson, whether in small interactions or in critical moments. And though he sometimes doubted himself, sometimes feared failure, he continued. Step by step, choice by choice, he began transforming. Not in dramatic ways, not in ways that everyone could see, but in deep, personal ways. The weight of anger and fear lessened, replaced slowly by understanding and awareness. The memory of that night became both a burden and a blessing. It reminded him of how close he had come to tragedy, but also of the power of mercy, courage, and humanity. He could not undo the past, but he could act differently in the present. He could carry that lesson quietly into every interaction, every decision, every moment of life. And as the months turned into years, he began to believe in something he had never allowed himself to believe before, that he could truly change. That he could live a life guided not by anger, fear, or hopelessness, but by reflection, responsibility, and compassion. That night had been a choice. Lowering the gun had been a choice. And every day afterward he learned that life was a series of choices. The past did not have to define the future. The weight of mistakes could be carried differently. And mercy, quiet, human, courageous mercy, could change everything. Life moved slowly after that night, but it moved in ways neither of them could have predicted. For him, every day was a careful balancing act between the person he had been and the person he wanted to become. For her, every day was a reminder of courage, of mercy, and of how a single moment could ripple through a life forever. He carried the memory of her eyes wherever he went. They were not images of fear, but of quiet understanding. Every time anger or frustration began to rise, he remembered the calm she had shown him. That memory became a guide, a gentle hand on his shoulder reminding him that he could act differently. It was not easy. Change never is. Old habits and instincts sometimes returned, whispering lies that he was too far gone, that mercy was weakness, that life was meaningless. But each time her eyes pulled him back to the truth, that he had the power to choose, even in the smallest moments. He started making small changes in his life. At first they were almost invisible, speaking more kindly to strangers, controlling his temper at work, listening instead of reacting when someone argued with him. But over time, these small acts built momentum. They began to change him from the inside, reshaping habits that had seemed unbreakable. The anger that had once defined him began to lose its grip, replaced slowly by patience and awareness. He also took steps toward accountability. He reached out to people he had hurt in the past, apologizing where he could, not expecting forgiveness but acknowledging his mistakes. Each apology was heavy, a reminder of years lost and opportunities wasted. But each one also felt like a small step toward redemption, a way to carry the lesson of that night forward into every interaction. Work became an opportunity to grow. He paid more attention to his colleagues, listened to their struggles, and helped where he could. He discovered that small acts of support could make a difference. A word of encouragement, a patient ear, or a helping hand became daily practices. Slowly, he began to feel connected to the world in ways he had never allowed himself to before. The same world that had once seemed hostile and unforgiving now felt a little less heavy. For her, life moved in parallel, though she did not know how deeply she had affected someone else. She continued her routine, work, family, friends, but she carried herself differently. The night on the street had left a permanent mark, teaching her that true courage was quiet and mercy was powerful. She began noticing the struggles of others, small and large, and offering help when she could. A smile, a kind word, a listening ear. She realized that these small acts could ripple outward, just as her whisper had done. She also reflected on her own fears and strengths. She had survived a moment that could have ended in tragedy, and that survival had given her insight. She understood fear, she understood anger, and she understood that mercy could be stronger than force. That understanding changed how she approached relationships, work, and daily life. She became calmer, more thoughtful, more deliberate in her actions. People around her noticed, even if they did not know why. Her presence carried a quiet strength, a sense of awareness that made others feel safer and understood. Neither of them forgot that night. The memory lingered not as trauma, but as a lesson. For him, it reminded him of what he could become, what he could achieve if he chose understanding over violence. For her, it reminded her that courage and mercy could alter the course of a life, even when she had no control over the circumstances. That night had been a turning point, not just for survival, but for growth. Over the months, he began taking bolder steps. He sought help for anger management, joining a small community group that focused on personal development and conflict resolution. He shared his story anonymously at first, talking about the moment when he had almost destroyed a life, and how one pause had stopped him. Listening to others and speaking his own truth brought relief and insight. He learned that many people struggled with similar burdens, and that choice and reflection were tools everyone could use to shape their lives differently. He also began volunteering in his community. Helping others became a way to honor the memory of the night, to turn a moment of near tragedy into something constructive. Whether it was helping at a local shelter, assisting elderly neighbors, or mentoring younger people who were struggling with anger or hopelessness, each act became part of a journey of redemption. He learned that even small, consistent actions could rebuild trust, not only with the world, but with himself. For her, the lesson of mercy continued to shape every interaction. She became an advocate for quiet courage in everyday life. She spoke to friends and family about the power of calmness, of seeing the humanity in others, and of understanding the hidden struggles people carry. She did not share her story for attention. She shared it as a principle, as a reminder that mercy and courage were available to anyone willing to embrace them. She also began mentoring younger people at work, guiding them through challenges without judgment. Her calm presence and thoughtful advice inspired others to reflect on their own actions. She realized that life often gave people opportunities to change each other's paths in subtle ways, sometimes through words, sometimes through quiet gestures, and sometimes through a single moment of mercy. Months turned into years. The man continued his journey, never perfect, but always trying. He learned that transformation was ongoing, that mistakes could return, and that vigilance was necessary. Yet he also discovered a freedom he had never known, the freedom of knowing that his actions could be different, that he could carry empathy and understanding into every interaction. That night had been the first step, but the steps that followed were his own choices. For her, the ripples of that night became more profound. She realized that courage and mercy were contagious in a subtle way. People responded to her calmness, her understanding, and her willingness to see beyond fear and anger. She did not control the outcomes, but she influenced them gently. And in that influence, she discovered a quiet satisfaction, knowing that the world could become a little better, one interaction at a time. Both of them learned the value of reflection. He reflected on every choice, every interaction, and every action. She reflected on every encounter, every gesture, and every moment of understanding she could offer. Life had become less about fear and more about awareness, less about anger and more about empathy, less about survival and more about living intentionally. The man sometimes returned to the street where it had happened, not out of fear but out of reflection. He would walk slowly, noticing the corners, the shadows, the flickering streetlights. He remembered her whisper, her calmness, and the pause that had changed everything. Those walks were both haunting and healing, a way to remember, to stay accountable, and to continue learning. She, too, would occasionally think of that street, though in a different way. She remembered the fear, but also the power of her own presence. She remembered the man, the gun, and the moment when a choice had prevented tragedy. That memory was a guide, a source of courage, and a reminder that small actions, like her whisper, could carry immense power. Time passed and life continued its unpredictable course. Both of them faced challenges, fears, and setbacks, but they carried with them a lesson that had shaped their futures. One pause, one moment of mercy, one choice to act with understanding could transform a life. That night had been terrifying, yes, but it had also been life-changing in the most unexpected way. In the end, neither of them forgot the power of that single moment. He continued to strive for better choices, to act with awareness, and to build a life guided by empathy rather than fear. She continued to carry her quiet courage into the world, touching lives without knowing it, teaching through example rather than words. And though they would likely never meet again, the memory of that night, the weight of the gun, the whisper, the mercy, the pause, remained with both of them. It reminded them that life is fragile, that choices matter, and that even in the darkest moments, courage, compassion, and understanding can shine through. That night had not just been about survival. It had been about transformation, growth, and the realization that every person has the capacity to change. And in carrying that lesson forward, both of them discovered something profound: the power of mercy, the strength in courage, and the enduring impact of a single choice. Life continued, imperfect and unpredictable, but with new hope. And sometimes when they thought back, they understood something simple but powerful. A single moment, a single decision, can ripple outward in ways no one can predict, and in those ripples, change becomes possible.